All right.
Okay, almost. Okay, here we are. This is Daily Evolver, yes.
All right.
Cool. All right. Well, hey, folks. Jeff Salzman here, along with Ankur Delight. Hey, Ankur.
Good morning, Jeff.
Hey. Yeah, so this week we were going to talk about the tragedies going on in Israel and Palestine. And I suggested this topic because there's no other headline, this week. This is the headline. And you wrote back and said, I checked it out and it's too much. And then you said, well, let's do it anyway. Yeah. So maybe we just start there. So where are you at, man?
I'm in a better place than I was yesterday. So I can give you a little bit of my background here. I was really into the news. I was a news junkie in high school and college. I really prided myself on that. I got really into Chomsky. And so I was like deconstructing a lot of things from the Chomskyan lens. And it was very, very helpful. And I had a lot of anger. And I was I think I was really negative. I've always had like a positive side, but I was just really pissed off. Just like the beginning, when you get tuned into, go from orange to green and get tuned into how just fucked up the world is, how unfair it is, and how me at Stanford as a person of privilege, that I was basically benefiting from this unfairness, and all of like the great things I had were on the backs of like inequality and racism and classism and all this shit. I was really upset, and I realized that the news was not good for me. And so I stopped. And I basically haven't looked at the news for, 10 or 20 years until we started doing this. And I'm like, oh, great. I got to look at the news to do the Daily Evolver. Yeah. And it's like, and I think it's in service because, and I think a lot of my analysis is correct in that the news essentially plays a very negative role in people's lives, and it doesn't empower us. And we have this expanded sense of concern, this circle of concern, but our actual circle of influence is quite small. And it's ultimately disempowering and negative for our personal relationships and our sense of purpose and our sense of hope. So I think that is correct. And there's a part that's pathological, which is that I'm running away from my emotions. And so when I heard that this happened, and my wife was like, oh God, this is happening. I had friends friends that don't read the news in France, this friend texted me and was like, hey, you must be having a really hard time with what's going on. And I'm like, oh, then I'm definitely not going to read it, and that's the pathological part, right?
Yeah.
And so then when you invited me to this, I was like, all right, here we go. And I did. And I spent most of yesterday crying. And I talked to a lot of friends. And it was helpful. And I just cried in every conversation I had. And it was really good. I think it's important for me personally to do that and not to resist that, And I did a lot of like physical emoting, just a lot of stretching and movement and just random sounds of displeasure.
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely.
Which I think is very helpful for me.
Yeah.
And then before going to bed, I watched this video that you recommended, that you recorded live with Nigel, who seems like a pretty cool dude.
Nigel's great. Yeah, Rigel runs the devolution. Runs the evolutionary collective, or the developmental collective, with the Institute for Cultural Evolution, and we do a thing every month. So yes, I was on last night talking about this. Yeah,
and I found the first thing you did in that to be very helpful, which is this integral practice of being like, so all of these major developmental stages are online in all of us. And let's just tune in with each one's reaction. And I think that was part of what was causing them. I had a lot of physical symptoms yesterday, like I had nausea the whole day, And I think part of what was causing that is I have all these reactions. Of course, as a student 20 years ago, I read like the whole history of those scene, and I have the whole like rational understanding and framework of international law and like Israel this and that whole thing, and then the whole injustice part of it, and then just the tragedy of it all. And also I have my tribal affiliation that I'd rather not, I'd rather be above that. But,
Yeah.
I came out of the left. And so my tribal affiliation is with Palestine, right? And I'm aware of that. And then I just have the red just being very fucking angry at everybody involved. And I'm might just burst into tears on this call. Just I can feel it, as a father. And you see, I didn't see any pictures or video, and I'm not going to do that. But just what I read about just the dead children, and I'm just pissed off at everybody, and it's really. So I'm in touch with all of those. All those levels are alive in me. Mm-hmm. And it was really helpful. And so I just want to suggest that like that practice, I think if we all did that practice, there could be a lot less of the unhelpful reacting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe I just do a quick walkthrough right now.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. And then there's some other things I'd like to say, because I think there's something that's really missing for me in that conversation, in that analysis, and that's what's missing is what I'm going to bring. So I'll bring that.
Perfect.
But yeah, please do that for us.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, again, as you Ankur said, it's a basic integral practice where we would walk down the meme stack. That is this evolutionary stack of worldviews that we all have that are all still online and sometimes repressed and sometimes not approved of and all that stuff. But as integral practitioners, we want to let them breathe. So we start with the sensitive self. And this is the self you're talking about, largely, Ankur, which is just horrified, wants to avoid crying, mourning, and depressed about the whole thing, So that self is really online for a lot of us. And then the rational self, which is the modern self. Modernity tries to create boundaries from this kind of eruption. And what went wrong? And how could this happen? Who's responsible? What are the ramifications? How can we stay safe? All that good stuff. And then our righteous self,
Can I just add something before you go on? With each of these selves, is my understanding, the practice is not to judge or explain away the feeling or the response of that self, but just to really to let it fly.
Absolutely.
Like we all have that sensitive self. We all have that rational self, and we're going to appreciate what it's contributing.
Yes, exactly. And we want to appreciate this next one too. And this is harder because these layers or these selves don't really like each other. Actually, a lot of times they're in conflict.
And they have dark sides, all of them.
Yeah, totally. So anyway, so now we're at what would be the blue stage, traditional stage. And that's our righteous self. And that's very busy with who's to blame, who's right, who's wrong here. And as I said before, it's not like it takes a lot of figuring. It's self-evident who's right and who's wrong, because the dots are connected in our ethnocentric blue little hearts. You knew that you related to the Palestinians. I actually knew that I related to the Jews, and that was my blue self coming on. And that's where, so we tell the story of what happened. And did it start with the incursion? Did it start with the occupation? Did it start with Israel in 1947? Did it start with Judea 3,000 years ago? A lot of stories being told here. And this is the stage where all that resides. And then there's the red level, which is the bloodlust level, which is the fuck you. I've taken this enough. We got to fight back. A lot of anger, and violence. This is where we don't want to give into the violence as integral practitioners. In general, we want to let the truth and the gift of each of these stages online, and not the downsides of each of them, because their downsides are quite obvious too. So anyway, that's the practice. And then the practice, of course, is then to further see that the whole world is also has these stages of development that are in conflict. And indeed, this conflict itself is exemplifies the struggle between modernity and pre-modernity. So that's the basic thing, the basic practice.
Yeah, and I encourage people to not just to hear Jeff's explanation, which I think is wonderful, but actually to do it. And it's really it's powerful. And it's powerful with any issue. But this is really, I mean, for me, maybe it's just me, but this is just really hitting me.
Yeah.
But I want to. I have a few points I want to make, but before that, there's something that I either don't understand or don't agree with in that categorization, which is attributing the sensitive self to green. Because it just seems counterintuitive to me. It seems like the sadness and the emotion of that would be like even before red. It's just like that sadness is just always gonna be there, and the green has the like more of the justice type thing. But is there?
No, I think you're right. I no, I totally think you're right, and I think that's a really great insight, Ankur, because that basic sadness, the capital B, capital S, basic sadness, that it's we start with that when we fall from paradise, when we become self-conscious. That's part of the deal, and that's been with us the whole time. So thank you. I appreciate that. That broadens that out.
Yeah, and it's just so sad. And everyone I've ever met, and this is where I like to go with people when I'm wandering through villages on pilgrimage and stuff. They're all in touch with that,
Yeah, I mean, what we could chart in terms of development is that the circle of what you're sad about gets bigger.
Yeah.
So now we're sad about something that's happening on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
That's the green, and that's, but yes, you're right. And then green, of course, wants to right the wrongs and, right the power dynamics and all of the stuff that we're seeing. That's that political side of green, which I talked about. I didn't mention this morning, but it's the part that criticizes modernity for its complicity in the creation of these red pockets of, because red, we've talked about this before, Ankur. Red is the problem in the world.
This is where I'd like to, I want to dispute that.
Okay.
And this is going to be interesting because obviously I'm going to try and bring a lot of nuance to this. Yeah. But if I were going to present, I'll give you like the non-nuanced version, like, because I know there's a lot of nuance to what you're saying. And if we're going to reduce the complexity of what you're saying to one statement, you're saying red is a problem. And if I'm going to reduce the complexity of what I'm saying in one statement, I want to say that blue is a problem. And to me, when I look at like all of the violence that's going on, it's the pathological side of blue, right? The bad side of blue. Obviously, there's a lot of, maybe not obviously, for people in orange and green, it's not obvious, but there are a lot of wonderful parts about blue. And this is the part of like community, having a creed, togetherness, the things that like, basically a lot of what we sacrifice in modern life, of like actually caring about people, investing in people, having a sort of like reason to come together and believe the same thing, without which our life is essentially meaningless. That's the blue brings that, right? And so I honor that. I think it's beautiful, and it's part of my work in the world, in my coaching program, and my whole like public thing is to bring that back in a healthy way. So I'm down. And I feel like what's going on here is because the othering, or the like my team versus your team, my story versus your story, is so strong, we're able to use all of the other tools, which primarily I think are probably like red tools and orange tools, for division and for violence. And so some of it's violence, but some of it's just like the administrative bureaucratic state and technology and the apparatus of that. It's like why there's this incongruity between this horrific mass rocket attack And like, why then? What happened? What did Israel do the day before? And they'll say like the violence of the state in the way that things are being administered and laws are being applied and all that has been going on for all this time. And it's just not as it's not as sexy as red. But we can see it's still
You're talking about the administrative state of Israel on Palestine, or
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, just like the occupation, right?
the occupation. Yeah, right.
So it's like that's another
totally
tool in this war that is just not as sexy, right?
Totally.
But they're both, I mean, it's and they're both, what I'm saying is they're both fueled by this desire, by this kind of like, you're not me, fuck you. I'm going to use all the tools at my disposal to mess with you. And then they come out looking differently. And sometimes it's like, it's always horrific, but sometimes you and I notice how horrific it is, like this week.
Yeah.
But in terms of the, like, you know, from a spiritual point of view, it was just as horrific for everybody involved there last week.
Yeah.
You know, and like no one in Israel, is, you know, my understanding, has had any sense of safety or security for decades.
Yeah.
Obviously, this makes it like worse, but it's not like last week they were just like super peaceful down at the core and like it's going to be great. You know, it's like no one over there has been safe for decades.
No.
No one over there can feel that peace for decades, right? And it's like not.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and what I was talking to a friend of mine who's a rabbi, and we had a very constructive and difficult, conversation about this yesterday. But one of the things we talked about, because we're both interested in Gandhi and Martin Luther King, is kind of ways in which this situation is different. And there's a lot of that we could get into. But one of the things why I think this conflict is so important for all of us is that in order to get nonviolence to work in the Gandhian example or the Martin Luther King example, there's still a pretty clear like green dynamic of oppression of like, these guys are the colonial assholes and these guys are the freedom fighters. And there's a pretty clean like blue thing of like, these are the good guys and these are the bad guys going on when you see what was going on in like, racism in the 60s and whatnot. But here, it's just like everybody has been just really blowing this for a while. And it's not like there's a clean good guy, bad guy scene from either the green or the blue perspective. And so the only way, in my estimation, and the only way to get beyond this is to enlarge in that circle of who is us versus who is them, to include the other side, where you didn't have to do that to get independence in India. Like, I mean, Gandhi was like there and wanted to do that. But for the most people, it was just like, we're going to unite. We're going to follow Gandhi's example. We're going to be nonviolent. But we didn't actually have to see the British as the same people as we are. And we just wanted them to leave. And they had a place to go.
Right.
But in this situation, it's not like anyone's going to leave or anyone has a place to go. That's just a fantasy, and I lived in Lebanon for a while, 20 years ago. I worked in Shatila camp, Palestinian refugee camp, taught creative writing there for a while. And the people there, they had like the key around their neck to their houses and the map to their orange groves. And I was, and I'm still learning the history of this. And I was like, oh, when did you leave? This doesn't make sense with the timeline. This is 2003, you're 40 years old. And they're like, no, I've never been there. It's my father's or something. And it's just like this, it's this fantasy that it's like no one's ever gonna leave that, and so it's not like
you're talking about these people would not be leaving their homeland, would not be leaving their father's orchards.
No, I mean, like, they got kicked out.
Yeah.
They lost the might versus right battle. They
Yeah.
did not have the might. They
Yeah.
lost.
Yeah.
And there's not some solution in which like the state of Israel is going to dissolve and all these people are going to leave and be like, no, actually, we fucked that up. You guys should just come back. It's not how it's going to be.
Right.
And it's like the other side. It's not like you're going to be able to obliterate every single Palestinian and be like, oh, good, we solved that problem in the way the Nazis wanted to solve the problem with the Jews. It's like, these are not solutions in the rational world. Like, the only way that this is going to work is if we enlarge this circle and be like, okay, we're going to get over this whole blue thing from because our like rational, because we understand it's only leading us to death.
Yeah.
On a rational level.
Yeah.
And we're gonna like sacrifice and put aside these affiliations to be able to like try and construct a future together.
Yeah.
So for me, and this is what I feel like is missing, and I don't know where this goes in the integral scene, but it's like my vocabulary for it is we have to open the heart to the other side's pain. And as long as I have this affiliation that like I have a discussion with somebody and they're justifying what Israel is doing because what Hamas is doing is so bad, or they're justifying like what the Palestinians or what Hamas is doing because what Israel had done for decades is so bad. As long as you're focused on what the other person is doing, we're missing the point.
No, absolutely. And I think what you're describing is actually, it sort of starts in modernity, but it's an integral view. In this case, if you are able to not contract around the Israel's bad storyline or the Palestinians are bad storyline, and able to hold the whole, an ever bigger story, an ever bigger view. It's like you're talking about, increase the circle. I think, first of all, that's sort of happening in the brutal way of evolution. War is sort of a means of that sometimes. It's just, you just get in the arena and you beat each other's brains out. And, as we've talked about before, wars are ultimately, once they move through the traditional stages of development into people get modern, people get hip to it, the cycle of violence ends. Traditional and earlier, there's cycles of violence, revenge, and that sort of thing. When people become modern, think of the Japanese and the Germans after World War II. They become modern in 5 years, 10 years. They're no longer a threat to the world. That is an amazing thing. And so we do want people to develop that modern sensibility where I can live with people that I don't have an ethnocentric connection to. And there's a lot of people, and there's a higher proportion of that in the Arab world. They're just developmentally, that's where the center of gravity is.
This is the part I didn't really think was helpful in what you guys were talking about yesterday.
Okay.
Because it's like, the premise of the state of Israel is ethnocentric. Right?
Yes.
It's not like they're not like, hey, we want to have this like secular inclusive state and you guys don't like it. And that Sam Harris quote, it's essentially just slander. Like nobody knows what's going on in the future. And he's just like, it's just a diss that is totally, in my perspective, not useful. It's just like an insult. And it's not, we're not going to, no side is going to not do violence at this point, right? So it's just, I see what you're saying in terms of this. There's certain ways in which, Israel is definitely like a modern state in ways that some of these other communities are not. But there's lines of development, in these different areas. And there's certainly not uniformity along those lines of,
no, not at all.
And like this wouldn't be happening if one of these people were fully modern, this wouldn't be happening.
No, I think you're right. I do. I think for a so-called modern state, Israel has a far higher proportion of blue and red. And, I think it's understandable in that people who were attracted to Israel in the homeland were the ethnocentric Jews.
Yeah.
They came from all over the world there because that rang their ethnocentric bell.
Yeah.
So, and that's huge in Israel. It's more so than it would be in countries in Western Europe. That's so. And the Jewish diaspora in the West is far more liberal than, So no, that's true. There's definitely a red, aggressive, conquering element in Israel. And there is in the Arab world, and they're both growing out of it.
And there isn't like, it's different, but there is in me and you, right? It's like, and that's what I feel like is so hard and beautiful about this, and my personal experience of it, is it wakes me up to it. And whether it's my relationship with an estranged friend or my father or whatever, it's like this thing of being unable to recognize someone else's pain and just focus on my own pain or my tribe's pain is what's blocking my growth and all of our growth.
So
And
well
it's
said.
so horribly demonstrated. They're doing this like service for us, and it's just like, oh God, it's just, and maybe one thing I think you were getting to, I cut you off, is how the brutality of war just destroys. I mean, it should destroy. It's breaking down against our ideological defenses into thinking that our side is a good guy.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now it's like very clear for me. And I hope this is what I want it to be very clear for everyone who's watching this, that is affiliated in any way with either side. Your side is the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
There are no good guys. Like, these people are this is all just bad guy stuff. And the narrative of like, my side is the good guy and your side is the bad guy, is just, it's poison. Like, we're never going to get to like non-killing of babies through that.
Yeah. I mean, certainly in this case, I mean, I think I'm not sure I would agree with that in sort of the whole way you're presenting it. I do see, I find myself arguing for modernity, and it's a provisional argument in a way, because modernity is less violent, radically less violent than traditionalism and tribalism. And that is something we have to take into account. They they dominate in different ways. They may dominate economically, they may dominate culturally, but they don't dominate in war as much as traditional people. I mean, every modern state has a traditional underbelly, so it gets activated. And I think that's worth noting. But my argument isn't that modernity is better than traditionalism, because the move into modernity requires the repression of a lot of traditionalism. Every stage wants to repress the previous one. And so that's always going to be problematic. And from an integral perspective, we want to go back and sort of correct that repression. So just to use the more abstract kind of ideas here, modernity comes in with this idea of, we no longer need religion. We can explain the world scientifically. And so does that make modernity better than traditionalism? No, because it just disenchanted the world. That's a bad thing. But that's the nature of growth. And you get to the next stage and the next stage, and finally you get to the stage where you look back and you see, look at all this stuff that we've repressed and put in shadow that is part of the human condition, including red, including sexy, fun, playful red, powerful red. Look at me, red. We want all of that. And so the move through the spiral is a fucking catastrophe. And we're seeing it. And it's very, it's tough to say right and wrong. I mean, right and wrong is, like I said, that's sort of one sort of stage where you'd look at that. When you get beyond that conformist stage, that feels like a question that I don't even want to think. I mean, it just doesn't engage me, because I can see so much more. So anyway, I just want to make that point, that when I argue for modernity, I'm not arguing for modernity in the whole.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just noticing that modernity has qualities, and being pacified is one of them. And, all of the other good stuff that is new in human history.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Well, maybe this is when we don't get all figured out.
Yeah.
We usually get it all figured out, Ankur. Uh,
Yeah. Can I tell one story?
yeah, please.
It's related, somewhat related. I think it's related to I don't know if I've told this story before here. It's related to the difficulty of moving on from blue in our sense of how we approach others. I think it's important, especially in this conversation, I've noticed to make these lines of development clear, because like you have modern warfare, modern tools being used for traditional ends, right? So it's not just all one thing. So one thing that I think prevents us is our sense of identity and affiliation and how we relate to other people from this blue thing. And so when I was in Lebanon for a few months, 20 years ago, living there, teaching there. And so I just spent some time in this Palestinian refugee camp, Shatila. But I also taught in this high school. And it was a Lebanese, high school for like kind of probably private high school, like rich kids. And I think it was called, I forget what it was called. But I'm young. I'm like 23 or 24. I have a lot of enthusiasm. I'm smart. I have no pedagogical history or anything, but I'm going in there and I have some international relations type class I'm teaching. And I bring in this article, I cut out for the paper, like International Herald Tribune or some daily, English language Lebanese paper, about these 27 Israeli fighter pilots that were sent to jail for refusing to fly some kind of combat or bombing missions over the south of Lebanon. There was I don't remember the details. There was some conflict going on at the time there. And these people were like, I'm not doing this anymore. I don't know if it's killing civilians or there's something that they just weren't into. It didn't fit their code as humans. And they were, members of the Israeli Defense Force, and they went to jail for it. And I show this to the students, 20 high school students. And over half of them, I don't remember exactly in my mind, but like the majority of them in my mind did not believe it. They're like, that's made up. And we get into this, and the core of their lack of understanding or ability to accept this came from language and the lack of precision and subtlety in the categories of language. And I notice this a lot when people talk about this issue, and because it's very complex for humans to grasp. We want things to be easy, but there's Jews, there's Israelis, and there's Zionists. And those things do not go together. And there are like Jewish Israeli Zionists, right? But there's also like non-Jewish Israeli Zionists. And there's also like, American Christian neoconservative Zionists. And there's like Jewish Israeli non-Zionist. There's just like, there's every combination. There's probably, I don't know how many, but there's probably like Arab Israeli Zionists. There's all kinds of stuff going on. And it's the same. There's like Arabs, and then there's Muslims, and then there's like their thing on the Palestinian question. And it's not one thing.
Right.
And I notice even in like mainstream media, people use these terms really loosely, like almost interchangeably, like, oh, this is what the Jews think. And it's like, dude, that is not what the Jews think.
Yeah.
And I think a little more care and precision with this could go a long way towards like priming the pump for us to be able to make these distinctions and expand this sense of self. And maybe one example, I thought of this, my wife sent me interview or some television appearance with the head of the Palestinian mission to the UK. I don't know his name, and his journalist, CNN, Christiane Amanpour, famous.
Yeah, Christiane Amanpour.
Amanpour, yes. And she had some sort of question for him about internal conflicts in the Palestinian. He's like a Palestinian Authority PLO type dude, so not politically aligned with Hamas. Again, I don't know all the subtleties of the people involved. And she's like, what do you the one of your own people, you're not. And sometimes the Israeli Secret Service sometimes has to defend you against one of your own people. And to me, that was like And of course, he answered in some sort of like political way that I was really disappointed with his answer. But the real opportunity then there, if you get asked that question by a journalist, is to be like, one of my own people, this whole thing is happening with my own people.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the level of consciousness where it's like these are all my people.
I know.
Like we're
I mean, literally, ethnically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Semitic.
I mean,
yeah.
These are all my people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like all this shit. It's fucked up. And these are all my people.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
that's what I want these people to say on CNN. And they never too attached to their own story to get there.
Well, welcome to, human evolution and worldviews. I mean, when you have a worldview where the world is a titanic battle between good and evil, that's it. Okay. That's what we're doing here. And there's the good guys and there's the bad guys. You can't expect somebody to get into the mind of the bad guys and assign anything good to them. They have no good intentions. They're not going to go to jail to protect you. That just doesn't compute. And that's where, probably well over half of the world is. Just in pre-modern, some sort of a pre-modern worldview. And we all have that, where it's very hard. I mean, think of this is where, what you're talking about can be a good practice. Look at the person who drives you the craziest and assign them some moral consideration. It's exhausting.
Yeah.
And very unfulfilling. No, I'm just kidding. But at some point, and this is evolution, that gets boring. I remember growing up, I just got bored hating this one and that one and, whatever I thought was right. And then I, grow, and then you get a whole new, when these new worldviews come online, it's like, wow, we could all live together. And they're a mother too, and they love their kid, and all that. But like I said in the other talk, there was and will continue to be a lot of that kind of work going on between the peace movements in both the Arab and Israeli world. I think they'll probably be, they're going to have a bump in the road, but I think they're going to come back stronger, because, this is one of the things that people are learning from war is that there's no winning here. At one point, when in indigenous traditionalism, if you will, traditionalism that doesn't have any modern example anywhere, they do think they're going to win. They think they're going to bestride the world and that the God's going to shine on them and they're going to, conquer their enemy. And that's most of human history.
Yeah. But now in this conflict, I don't know, God knows what the percentage is, but some large percentage on both sides think they're going to win somehow. They're doing this. Like the delusion, like from any rational point of view, like who's going to win?
Yeah.
But there's
I know.
You wouldn't do this stuff if you thought you weren't going to win by it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean,
you're
sometimes winning can be
cynical, right? And morally just.
Yeah, let me just say that at Red, winning can be dying and going to paradise. So you can die for your cause.
Good point. Yeah. Okay, it's very different. But at blue, it's not.
At blue, you start being attached to your wealth.
And your
I don't want to die, actually.
And your tribe, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But Red Warrior is such a fascinating stage. I mean, especially to study it, in terms of, tribal cultures and stuff. They would do anything. I'm thinking of the Native Americans here in the battle, sometimes between each other, sometimes with the white. They would often were seen as cowardly. They would do guerrilla warfare. They never wanted to risk their lives. Certainly not like traditionalists or blue armies, where it's like throw 1,000 men in there. says the general from 5 miles away.
Yeah, yeah.
That doesn't happen. So they're not going to waste men or, energy. But once they commit, they'll go in and happily die, and that's interesting, because there's something about that we actually do want to get in touch with in our own red. What's the thing we die for? Happily. It's like, fuck it. Yes.
Yeah. It's beautiful. And it's a kind of disconnection from ego in a way, and just like all of stupid shit,
Yeah. And then, of course, you're in touch, at that stage, you're in touch with the spirit worlds in ways that we moderns have a hard time understanding.
Yeah.
And, so you're already in touch with the part of you who isn't really going to die, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Crazy, man. So, Ankur, just tell me a story about when you were in Lebanon and what you thought of the people, and what's the vibe having lived there? What'd you think?
Yeah. So it was 2003.
Okay.
I mean, I had the most amazing time. So here's the thing. I love food. So when you ask me that, I'm just being honest. There's two things that come to mind. It's like going to these like really just cheap restaurants, not like fancy at all, just like dive restaurants that had the most amazing food.
Yeah.
Just super fresh, really, really incredible produce. And celebrating Ramadan. So it was the only time I've actually celebrated Ramadan for a month.
Mm-hmm.
And just the culture around that, the food, like my neighbor or landlord bringing me grapes from her farm in the Bekaa Valley, going out at night to the night markets, all the people eating all the sweets, and just the sense of solidarity, like walking through, being hungry, trying to teach at that high school. Like everybody was super crabby and hungry, and I was, but the kind of like solidarity of doing it all together. Yeah, it was I have just the best. It was magical. It was a magical time. And then the surroundings of like it's kind of this like fantasy video game. It's like bombed out buildings everywhere, and and it was safe, but it was like safe, and you have this like sense of adventure from this incredible, like, this is what the people went through recently, and then you can talk to them about their stories. And it's just I didn't, my Arabic shoya, but I learned some, and I could read, and I spoke French, so I could tip a lot of people in French.
Wow.
English.
Well, just hearing that, I can literally feel my blue strata light up, with that sense of, I love adventure. That's a big one there. And community, that liquid space of community that is so delicious, and at modernity that is, that's dissolved. We all live in our suburbs, and we, leave home.
Not if you listen to my podcast. And you got my newsletter, which is all about community and meaning and purpose.
Well, God bless you, because that's one of the big things that needs to be brought back at Integral, because modernity leaves us, alienated a lot of times.
It's just not worth it. And a lot of my friends, graduates from Stanford in the tech world and all that, they're like totally living that and discovering it. That, you know what, it's just not worth it. It's not worth the money.
God bless it. God bless them. Yeah. Well, that's the work of what's next and what's coming on, is reintegrating, the juice and community and enchantment of that is our birthright. And it's all still there,
It's there. It's all there.
Yeah. All right.
Well, all right. One more little thing.
All right.
This is a communication tip It's an example of culture enforcing healthy and direct communication. When you smoke a hookah in Lebanon, so you're like there in this awesome cafe. This was in like the kind of old Christian French part of town. It was like super fun to be in, and you're hanging out with your friends. And there's one hookah, in the middle of the thing, and everyone's just smoking the same hookah. You just smoke as long as you want. You're just like puffing away like a caterpillar on a mushroom. Just when the next person is ready, they just tap on your hand.
Okay. And
And
then
so
you give them the pipe, or you give them the.
and then you pass them the pipe.
Yeah.
And so there's no like inner dialogue of like, oh, is this too much? Oh, does he need it? Oh, okay. It's like all of that stuff that so many things in our modern atomic society, there's no sharing because there's anxiety about sharing. And like, oh, and then is it not going to be correct? And oh, is it maybe I'll just give it to him right now and I won't actually do what I need because I don't want to borrow the car for too long because then it's his car. This is just like you take what you need. And then when someone asks you, you give it to them and it's just chill.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. Well, it's one of the things that I want to put on the table, or at least recognize what you're putting on the table, is that these upsides of these earlier stages. What was I going to say? That there's well, of course, there's the community. There's the sharing. Oh, just in general, that we think about the fighting and the violence and so forth of particularly red, but friending. If we think of evolution, the two big forces of evolution is fighting and friending, both, and that's not just human beings, but the whole sort of living world. And it's one of the things that's interesting about tribal life also, is that when tribes aren't under pressure, they're terribly friendly to other tribes or to a stranger who might come into town. They're very interested. And so there's not they're not like violent people. They're actually terribly friendly people. But, it's like a 3-year-old. They can turn a dime. But that friendly part is something we want to notice, that it's at least half of the whole sort of milieu of what we're working with. In fact, I love a book. I may have mentioned it to you. I forget the name of it, but talking about what made humans successful ultimately, because even fighting Neanderthals and the 2 or 3 other sort of humanoid kind of species, is we were the friendliest. And he called it Homo puppy.
Oh,
yeah. And that's really the key. So in all of this, we're all Homo puppy, and so let's count on that part of it to carry us through, because that's the part that's carried us through.
I like that. Thank you, Jeff.
All right, Ankur. Always a pleasure, man. So we'll sign off of the YouTube thing and stay on for each other here for a second. Bye, folks.